Thanks for staying with us right here on Sunrise as we continue this morning. Now, Corruption Watch released their annual report earlier this week, and the numbers reveal that people are becoming less tolerant of corruption and are prepared to take those who do corrupt deeds to book. Now, it showed that more than 14,000 complaints of corruption were received in the last 5 years. Joining us, of course, to talk more on the results of the report and unpack more in detail is David Lewis, who's the Executive Director of Corruption Watch. And we are also joined by Dennis George, who's the General Secretary of Fedusa in studio. Remember, you can be part of the conversation by calling us on 011 447 1742 or 447 2570. We're also taking your comments on our Facebook as well as our Twitter pages. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure. Good morning.
So let's kick off this conversation with you, David, and just talk about the report. I just had a glance at it, well, the physical one, as much as like I've read the stuff that's online. Firstly, it's accessible, it's easy to read, which is a good thing. And looking at the different sectors that are covered, I was quite surprised that education is the number one.
Yeah, that surprised us as well. From the day we opened our doors, we were surprised at the number of reports we got on corruption in schools. And it led us to mount a campaign directed at schools. So the reports have really escalated. And I think the answer for that is that there is a lot of corruption at schools, but also because, people who might otherwise not think to report corruption, when they see their school kids' lunch being taken away from them, or some toilet not being repaired because the money has been eaten, and I'm sad to say very often by a combination of the headmaster and the chair of the school governing body, they get very angry and they report it.
So outside of the education, what other areas does the report cover?
You will not be surprised to hear how the biggest sectors are education, traffic, licensing, authorities, housing, immigration, very, very big. And those are misleadingly referred to as so-called petty corruption. Actually, they're the instances in which ordinary people experience corruption most directly, and where people get to make up their mind about the quality of their government and the quality of their public service, and that's why you see people not voting or taking to the streets or whatever.
So the quality of the government and service delivery ultimately is where it comes to, and taxpayers' money being spent. So let's talk about, like, on average, the impact of corruption to us as South Africa from Fedusa's point of view.
Yeah, look, the impact of corruption, you can just look at SAA as a company. There you have a number of airlines flying on the same routes. They use similar airplanes, they use similar fuel, they use the same kind of pilots. But the one company cannot get off the ground, and that is SAA. And it's sitting now again with the huge debt. They got themselves into a lot of trouble where they went to corrupt the travel agents to say, don't book passengers on that company, book them. And now they get burnt again with another massive 1.5 billion rand fine. You see, so we need to clean up in society, clean up in our system, so that we can stop this thing. And Fedusa Congress passed a resolution that we must now not only just report these things, but we must go after these directors that run these companies. And we must have them declared delinquent directors. And we have already filed a Section 77 notice with NETLAC. And our first meeting is set up for the 7th of March, where we are asking government in our Section 77, please do a forensic audit of all the state-owned companies for the last 5 years. Because, then you can uncover the evidence, and with that evidence, you can then go to court to have those people declared delinquent directors, because we're not going to stop that. Okay,
talking about delinquent directors, there's a perception that, the public sector is more corrupt versus a private sector. Is that a reality, or is it, where is that coming from?
No, it's not. It's not a reality. I mean, for most corruption, whether it's a traffic cop and a driver or a big firm and a procurement committee, is an interaction between the public and the private. There are pure forms, if you like, of private sector corruption, just as there are pure forms of public sector corruption. But most of it is an interaction. No, the reason why it sometimes seems that there's more concentration on the public sector, especially from unions and NGOs, is that we can't, this is a bit of a technical argument, we can't go to court and review the findings of a private party. We can review the findings of the public, so that when we take SASSA to court, we are also looking at CPS and exposing CPS, but only the criminal justice authorities, the NPA and the Hawks.
Yeah, but some
will
argue that, it looks like SASSA is the one that's being clamped on, versus, like, for example, if an ABSA situation, they say in the private sector, if it's ABSA, it's dead, they're like, okay, that's their profit, we'll see how that goes.
Well, it looks like SASSA is the only one being focused on, although if you ask the CEO of CPS if he thought that we were going for him, I think he would tell you that we were, because it's the Hawks and the NPA who should be going for CPS, and they're not doing their job. We get, talking about the ABSA thing, we get very few reports of collusion, even though collusion is very rife in South Africa. And the reason why we don't get it is because there is an agency, a public agency, the competition authorities, that are doing their job. So people report to the competition authorities, which is exactly what they should do, and we're pleased to be out of a job there, because there is an effective public agency. Just as if there was an effective NPA, effective police, we also wouldn't be getting as many reports.
So from Fedusa's point of view, is the focus more on the public sector versus what's happening in the private sector? Do you think?
No. There is a huge focus on the private sector. You remember the issue, and there it comes under the issue of collusion. So we will collude to increase the bread price.
Well, it's margarine as of yesterday.
The bread would normally sell for 6 rand, but we agree that we are going to now make the price 10 rand, and we're not going to let the price come down, you see. So you defraud, society, from that kind of money. And what we have, our legislation is actually very strong. Where we are weak is the implementation. We can fine a company up to 10% of their turnover, and there's an element of criminal prosecution. You see, so you must have to start making examples of these things. Okay.
So the report comes out, and it's blasted all over the media. Which one, they have a role as well of disseminating that information, and secondly, are people held accountable? What happens after that?
A variety of things. I mean, we use the reports to identify hotspots of corruption and patterns of corruption. We investigate a small proportion of them. We use the reports to identify opportunities for litigation, for policy advocacy. And so we're very active in relation to the reports, but we can't investigate everyone. But I mean, the most important thing that we do with the reports is what I'm doing here, is we talk to the public and we tell the public what it is that we're doing. The better to encourage them to report further, because without whistleblowing there is no way of combating corruption. And this is what they're doing in increasing numbers. Our numbers are, particularly in the last year, our numbers have really increased exponentially. And I think we're going to see very high levels of growth this year. 2016 was really a year in which people spoke out against corruption, and one of the reflections is in the volume of reports we're getting. Okay,
talking about the reflection, the impact of like where those resources could have been directed to, and how that could have changed the lives of South Africans from Fedusa's point of view.
Yes, I mean, if you take for instance, why must the government pay for a pen that costs 5 rand? Why must the government pay 20 rand for that particular pen? And we say we work through a tender system. That's where the people come in, you see. And that money could have been used in our schools. We could have built more clinics. We could have spent much more to uplift our society. And that is what corruption does. It deprives the poorest of the poor, and it also robs our economy, from growing and make our economy less inclusive. And that is very important for Fedusa. But I mean, we feel if we can have partnerships with Corruption Watch, with the media, then we can win this war on corruption.
Okay, talking about winning the war on corruption, the report comes out. The question is, and then what? But then also there's a looking at like, how do we change mindsets of South Africans? Because there's the corruptor and the corruptee, the general public and active citizenship.
It's a huge challenge. I mean, behavior change is always a huge challenge. I mean, we even saw it in the various safe sex campaigns, where at least there's a very focused objective. This is a very widespread, diverse problem, and it really is difficult. But I think you do it by constant communication and constant education of the public, and that's what our model is. And that's what the media are doing as well. It's just about talking. And what I was saying earlier is that I think in 2016 you saw real evidence of behavior change. And this is a long game, it's also a never-ending game. I think it's a lesson to us that you can't ever sit back and think, you've got the government you wanted and now things will be delivered to you. You have to constantly hold governments accountable wherever you are, whether you're in Sweden or South Africa or Norway or Somalia. You'll get the government you deserve if you don't hold them accountable.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. 4,300 a year. Reports came in, 15,000 whistleblowers. Looks like, of course, we are making progress. Thanks for joining us this morning. That was David Lewis from Corruption Watch and Dennis George from Fedusa joining us in studio this morning.